Come on, that's right. Yes, I move, please. Donnchadh, I didn't think. I thought Deputy Rock might be briefer. Yes, I move the Regulation of Private Security Firms Bill 2019. Buineann an Bill seo le istócha furan slándála agus atá ag déaghlá le evictions and héadí. I'm moving this bill because we are increasingly concerned at the use of unregulated and unaccountable security firms by banks and other organisations to enforce court orders. It is extremely serious and we believe it requires legislative action. We first raised this in September with the Minister following the controversial Frederick Street protests and evictions in which private security firms were seen to be quite heavy-handed and, I suppose, causing significant controversy. At the time, I contacted the PSA, the Private Security Authority, to complain about the conduct of those involved in that eviction and in the enforcement of a court order. They informed me that they had no responsibility for that. Those who are undertaking repossessions are not covered by the Private Services Act, so I was told. So it is a fact that a clear loophole exists in the 2004 Private Security Services Act, and obviously that is of huge concern. At the time I raised this with the Minister, I called on him to act or we would bring forward legislation. So far we have not seen any legislation in our heads, therefore we are moving this bill. The accounts provided from the recent eviction in Roscommon were appalling, with private security being given apparent free rein to do as they wished to the people being evicted, and it brought to mind scenes from our past of people being thrown out onto the side of the road. It's also a cause of concern that the Gardaí did not intervene to prevent this, and according to reports, closed off the road to facilitate these actions by these bank enforcers. There's clearly a huge anomaly in oversight here, that people who are involved in the enforcement of court orders and evictions and all that involved, potentially unregulated. So our Act would amend Section 2 of the Private Security Services Act 2004 by adding a new category of security personnel to come within the remit of the Act and under the scope of the Private Security Services Act, and that is that persons involved in the execution and or enforcement of court orders, including orders for repossession. This Act generally involves the regulation and oversight of security staff. For example, Section 29 and 30 of the Act is explicit in stating that all operating with the sector must identify themselves clearly and show ID to anyone who requests it. The authority also covers areas such as the ability to grant and renew licences, issue identity card to licensees, where appropriate, suspend or revoke licences, establish and maintain a register of licensees, specify standards to be observed in the provision of security services by licensees or particular categories of licensees, specify qualifications or any other requirements, including requirements as to training for the grant of licences, undertake or commission the compilation of statistical information and other records necessary for the proper planning, development and provision of these services, investigate any security services being provided by a person, establish and administer a system of investigation and adjudication of complaints against licensees, monitor the provision of private security services generally, liaise with licensees and advise the Minister on any matter relating to its functions. So none of this currently applies to this area. There is no licensing, there's no ability to revoke licence, there's no requirement for ID, there's no route for complaint. That is clearly an unacceptable situation. If we accept door staff in our bars and people who are doing security work in shops on our high street to be subject to regulation and high standards, yet people involved in the potentially most intrusive, hard-edged and indeed potentially violent security work are not subject to any regulation. It is incredible, it is unacceptable, and this bill intends to resolve that. The lack of accountability is shocking, and those who are forcing evictions and who are acting in a violent or abusive way must be held accountable, must be subject to regulation and must be capable of having a complaint made against them. Our bill would rectify that. It would ensure that anyone involved in an eviction would be subject to standards, oversight, licensing and carry ID. They could also be subject of complaints, and I think that's the bare minimum we can expect, and the the bill will provide for that, and I hope that the government will support it.
Thank you very much.
I might say finally, Ceol briefly, I'm aware that there were threats against government ministers in recent times in relation to evictions, and I want to take the opportunity to condemn that. That's absolutely unacceptable.
Thank you, Deputy.